What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Walkout Network. It's your man, Ant Walker, here with another edition of Unleashed, the weekly panel discussion show. So let me adjust this frame just slightly here. There we go. There we go. So we are back after a week hiatus. We had a fight night event that wasn't exactly ringing any bells, so decided to take a week off. Had to go out of town, handle some family stuff, but now we are back to give you the content that you so need and love. So let's go ahead and introduce two gentlemen who don't need an introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway because I like introducing them. The first is the jack of all trades who's mastered them all, the senior editor of Sherdog.com, Mr. Ben Duffy. Ben, what's going on, my man?
Hey, I'm doing really well, and if we had to pick a week to take off from the show, the week after last weekend's UFC on ESPN 16 was the one to take.
We had a fight card last weekend?
Oh man, we had a card.
Yeah, I was enjoying vacation time. So probably was spiking my coffee or drinking a beer some of the time. But anyway, now let's go ahead and introduce the man with the facts, the stats, the figures, and the numbers. He is the associate editor of Sherdog.com. He is Jay Petrie. Jay, what's going on, brother?
You know, I missed you guys. I'm at the same time, I'm happy that we had that kind of moment of recharge time, because that last week's event was just so, well, it happened and we let it happen. but I feel like that was penance, because this week was so intense. How intense was it? It's responsible for the stat of the week, which I love this stat. One, UFC Fight Night 179, Moraes versus Sandhagen, is the first event in UFC history, after about 530 events, to have multiple spinning kick knockouts. Just hasn't happened. We've had one other card that had a couple spinning back strike knockouts, but Johnny Walker in 2019, Johnny Walker's was a spinning back fist. So this is the first one we've had multiple spinning back kicks, and it made it so interesting that the main event barely registered, which is incredible if you think about it.
Definitely some memorable knockouts, and we are definitely going to discuss that from Saturday's event. But I think you're opening up a different discussion here, Jay. And we got to ask ourselves, was last Saturday's event, was that the best event that we've seen so far in 2020?
It's certainly on the short list. I can't, like, right off the bat think of one that I enjoyed more. And here's an interesting test. I didn't watch most of this card in real time. Jay made me do work on Saturday, so I had to get up at what was a very early hour for me and watch
2 p.m.
Hey, I work nights. I then watched KSW 55 live. So as soon as that was done, I went to bed. I didn't wake up until the third fight from the top of the UFC card. So I ended up watching most of the card on Sunday, knowing the results from the beginning. And even knowing, like, how all these fights were going to turn out, and having had the, knockout of the Forever spoiled for me, I was riveted. It was really enjoyable. And that says something, because there are a lot of fights you'll watch, a lot of cards you watch where you're like, oh, well, that was fun, but I'm never going to rewatch that. In essence, I was almost rewatching it because I knew who was going to win and exactly when. I was practically reading along on the play-by-play, and I still enjoyed it. It was a hell of a card.
It's really interesting, just posing the question about best events of the year, that some have stuck out to me, but at the same time, this year has been different for a lot of reasons, because the COVID and everything has been compacted, the schedule as such. Because we're in the middle of, what is it, a 32-week consecutive weekend stretch of UFC cards. It's very difficult to differentiate event to event to event. So I am with Duffy in the notion that this has imminent rewatchability. This is the kind of thing that you can show people and go, check out this card. Now, it's kind of funny, because this card was very oddly paced, because the first 4 fights went the distance, and they were okay, fine. They served a purpose. They were something. And then Joaquin Buckley happened. Like, it went from 0 to 60, and then it didn't really come back down afterwards. And that's what made it so interesting and enticing to me, is the Buckley knockout kind of started things off, and made everything go crazy. I mean, the next couple fights were first round knockouts, and then there was the surprisingly exciting Topuria Yusuf Salam matchup. It was just boom to boom to boom to boom. And that kind of feeling and pace was refreshing. So I think this is a very memorable card. I personally nominated it among events of the year just because it does stand out in that sea of, you know, all these events have. Like you can look at a couple, like the Overeem Harris card. That was interesting. That had a lot going for it. You know, there were several fights like the Song Yudong Marlon Vera fight was sensational. Some big knockouts like Miguel Beza knocking out Matt Brown. Okay, cool. Great stuff. But they don't hold a candle to what happened this weekend. So I think when the main event, and we're probably going to talk about this, when the main event is the potential for knockout of the year, but it isn't even the best knockout of the night, I think that says to you that there's that kind of action that makes you go, oh, this card worked out just fine.
You know what? I'm halfway with you guys, and I'm halfway on the other side of the fence here, because we did see some spectacular knockouts. We saw some really exciting stuff, but like you said, Jay, the pacing was really off on this, and to no fault of the competitors, of course. We can't expect to see spinning back kick knockouts for an entire card. Like, it's just not happening. But right now, I mean, off the top of my head, I didn't research this nearly as thoroughly as I should have to give a good answer here. But I'm just going to go on a limb and say, off the top of my head, I'm still kind of leaning toward UFC 249 as my event of the year. And there was a lot of action on that card, some spectacular finishes. Ngannou Rosenstruck is the one that really stands out to me. But on top of that, I think it's something that encompasses the feel of 2020 in mixed martial arts. To have COVID be that was the return of pay-per-view action in COVID, and to see the loops that the UFC went through to make this happen, and just all the iterations of this card that fell through, and the whole story makes it the card of the year for me right now. And I know we'll revisit this conversation in a few months here, and perhaps my answer will be different. Maybe an event overtakes it later on, or perhaps I just have a more thorough look at what we've seen already and come up with a better answer. But right now, I got to say UFC 249, because that feels like the card that defines this year in mixed martial arts, if not even just sports in general. So that's it for me. But some really, really, really spectacular finishes on this card. Make no mistake about it.
And another thing is that watching it the way I watched it insulated me from the pacing, because I had that little skip 30 seconds button. I watched this whole card in about 2 hours and 15 minutes. It was fantastic. It was a roller coaster ride. You know, if other people wasted 6 hours watching it, I don't know what to tell them, but it was a great 2.5 hours of entertainment.
Yeah. And to top it all off, I think that your answer is what I agree with wholeheartedly, because of the significance, not just in the fact that of the fights in the era of COVID, but the actual ramifications of the event were far more substantial, because the only real top 5 fight that anything came of it is the main event. And at the same time, the winner is not necessarily going to fight for the next title. So it isn't the kind of level. Whereas, the main event at 249 was Justin Gaethje and Tony Ferguson for the interim title to fight Khabib. Good luck with that. And then also Henry Cejudo and Dominic Cruz. So I think the implications of the event it was bigger. It's kind of like, and this is something I don't want to go too far into, because I know we're going to talk about this, a crazy knockout that happens on the undercard can be spectacular, but it isn't as significant, as important, because the end result, you still go, that was awesome, but now what do we do? Whereas if it were like a title fight, then you go, oh my God, not only was that awesome, but that was also a champion that did that.
Right. It's a good point. It's a big difference between, having a spectacular knockout on, in a title fight, or in a title eliminator, or in just some other main card bout that has substantial ranking significance, as opposed to one where, it's a potential curtain jerker. It's something that most people may not be watching. But then on top of that, the guy who won is probably going to be fighting another athlete debuting or someone else coming off the Contender Series or something where it just feels low stakes. So I think that's a good point there. But you brought up something else that I think is very important to discuss in that main event. Cory Sandhagen with a spectacular finish over one Marlon Moraes, former World Series of Fighting champion. I was struggling with the name of what the PFL used to be right there. Now, this was Marlon Moraes' return fight after losing his attempt to win the UFC bantamweight title that had been vacated by TJ Dillashaw against Henry Cejudo. However, now Cory Sandhagen gets this spectacular finish over someone who previously was the #1 ranked contender, if I am not mistaken there. Now, do you think, now, Jay, you did kind of put this opinion out already, and I want to start with Ben on this one here. Do you think that Cory Sandhagen has done enough to earn his title shot now, or is this going to be and this going to be like a path to screw Aljamain Sterling, or what do you think is happening next with Sandhagen?
I actually liked Sandhagen's own take on this, where he said, obviously I would take a title shot if they gave it to me, but in fairness, Aljamain Sterling should get the next title shot, because it is in very recent memory that Sterling completely embarrassed him. You know, tapped him out in what, like 90 seconds, 2 minutes, something like that. Just completely, ran over him on the ground. It would be a travesty if Aljamain Sterling did not get the next title shot. I don't think the UFC is going to jump him, but I guess we'll see.
I wish I could be that optimistic. I feel it in my bones. Now, the reason I feel this is not at all in any way because I agree with it. Because Aljamain Sterling is on a 5-fight win streak with, submissions over Cory Sandhagen and Cody Stamann, beat Pedro Munoz, beat Jimmy Rivera, beat Brett the Pikey Johns. So that's a good win streak to get going. And, hey, that's right. He just tapped out Sandhagen in 90 seconds in June. So, or at least I know, it is very intentional that the UFC has not announced the next bantamweight title fight. This is not an accident. This is not something that they go, oh, we don't know. Considering both fighters are so public about their intentions to fight. Peter Yan saying he wants to, let's do it, let's go, come on, what are you waiting for, come on. And Aljo Sterling is Aljo Sterling. He said a couple things on the internet, just saying. So the fact that this isn't put together feels to me like the UFC is waiting for something better, which I don't know why. I don't know what the deal is. I don't know what the weight is. There's not a major injury. There's not a contract negotiation. There's not something that we as media members are publicly aware of that is stopping this fight from being made. As if the UFC was waiting for a sensational performance to go, well, sorry, Aljo, but did you see that? Look at how many people on Twitter posted about that. And that's the kind of feeling that they were waiting for. Let's see, Frankie Edgar and Pedro Munoz, hoping that Frankie Edgar got some crazy thing. You go, look at Frankie Edgar. He was a champion here. He's fought for the featherweight title 3 times. Look at all these cool things. Cory Sandhagen knocked out the #1 contender. It feels like that kind of posturing and positioning to push past Aljo Sterling, which I would not be surprised if the UFC rankings, this iteration, when they're updated on Tuesday, I believe, put Cory Sandhagen above Aljo Sterling, even though there is a head-to-head loss this summer against, of Cory getting tapped out. So I feel like, yes, the UFC is going to try and make Peter Yan Cory Sandhagen, and it'll be a good fight. That's the thing. Bantamweight's one of those divisions that we've talked about in this show before. Bantamweight and featherweight, you can't really make a bad stylistic matchup between two fighters. You go, I don't really think that's going to play out well. Every fight's going to be fun. Could you imagine if Cody Garbrandt fought Jose Aldo? That's weird, but that sounds fun, right? It's the kind of divisional parity that you really enjoy. So Sandhagen versus Peter Yan would be a good fight. And it feels like it would be more of a banger than Jan versus Sterling, which the UFC seems to want. But I don't know. I feel like I need to take a shower now. I don't like it. I don't like it.
You know what, Jay? I'm not going to be one to call you paranoid or say you're imagining things, because I'm feeling the same. I'm feeling it too, man. It just feels like they're trying their best to weave this narrative that Aljo should not be in a title fight. We look at Dana White's comments after so many other fights where, you know, on the same event, he's talking about, yeah, this guy's up next for a title shot. And then he's like, oh, well, Aljo, we haven't decided.
We don't really talk about fight. We don't really like to talk about
I don't like to make fights right after an event. He falls back on that one. Then we see the positioning of prominent bantamweight fights, like you mentioned before. And if Frankie Edgar just styled on Pedro Munoz, there is no way in hell Frankie Edgar doesn't get that shot.
Yep.
It's just a world that Frankie Edgar doesn't get a title shot in. Sorry, that's not the world we're living in. Frankie Edgar would be getting a title shot if he had some spectacular knockout. And then to see Cory Sandhagen finish Marlon Moraes in probably the most spectacular way you can imagine, you know, save for the knockout that preceded it. It just seemed like, wow, this is the perfect thing to skip Aljo. But then we also have the X factor of Henry Cejudo in his quote unquote retirement. You know, what is he talking about behind the scenes? We've seen the UFC kind of trotting him along for a lot of PR stuff lately. He's there all the time. He seems like he's at every event. He's making some public appearances somewhere. He doesn't feel like a retired fighter to me. At all. So I think we have to factor in Henry Cejudo there. I think now, although Cody Garbrandt is now injured or out of the flyweight title fight, had he beat Davidson Figueiredo, I think he'd jump over Aljo for a bantamweight title shot. There are so many things that the UFC has put in place to stifle Sterling that I think they're just going to find some other way to do it. Now, I will say this. Had Marlon Moraes won this fight, no matter the method that he won this fight, I think they would announce him versus Jan instantly. And Jan versus Moraes was a fight that was on the table for, I believe, a card in
Kazakhstan card.
Yeah, before everything started going to hell.
Yeah.
So the pieces have already been sitting there to deny this man the title shot that everyone else says he deserves. So I just think they're gonna find another way to do it, unfortunately, unless they go with Aljo and it's like, okay, that means Cejudo really is retired, or he's gonna stay out too long to let the belt collect dust. All right, there's no way we can think that Cody Garbrandt's gonna be back healthy in time to jump in some form of a title fight, whether it be flyweight or bantamweight, and flyweight to justify a bantamweight shot. There just seems to be that the UFC's plans have just unraveled to an extent here in screwing Aljo. So I think they're still mad about the whole testing free agency thing in 2015.
And you know what the thing is? There's another name out there that could throw another monkey wrench into the title fight. TJ Dillashaw. Now, I strongly, vehemently disagree that TJ Dillashaw should get a title shot off of testing positive for EPO. Like, no, why should he get a title shot for failing a drug test that is, you know, that's one of the most, you know, think of the notorious drug tests in sports history, and Lance Armstrong's EPO is among the most notorious. So TJ Dillashaw using the same types of substances for blood doping to maintain his reign and run,
something that cannot be interpreted as a mistake. You
can't slip and, you know, have a GNC tablet of EPO or something. It's contaminated in the machine.
Yeah. There wasn't like a Dominic Cruz apologist sprinkled EPO in his cornflakes.
No, this isn't Frank Mir kangaroo meat. No, man, this is straight up injectable stuff. And the fact that it's a conversation that has been had. You know, this is something as a media member I have heard discussed, you know, amongst UFC officials, that TJ Dillashaw could get right in there, which, you know, I don't know. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. Duffy, do you think Dillashaw should get right back in there for a title. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I thought you were going to ask if I like TJ Dillashaw. I'm like,
yeah, are you
but I don't think that's the idea.
Friend?
I don't think you're supposed to like him. I think he should have to. I mean, I think he should be immediately in the title picture.
Mm-hmm.
He should have to beat a contender, and he should have to pass the pre and post drug tests. And I mean, if he can do that, we are a very forgiving society.
Yeah,
you know, because on straight quality, obviously, he's top 5 material.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are people in the title picture that, you know, I would certainly favor him to beat. But yeah, I think he should have to fight once. It's not like Cejudo. Cejudo is the only person where I'd be like, yeah, he should be able to button line in front of Aljamain Sterling, because he was the champ. He walked away without ever losing it in the cage. He didn't fail a drug test. He just decided to be weird. And, you know, certainly being weird is not a bar to holding a UFC title. So, but right. Dillashaw should have to win one clean.
Absolutely. And if they give Dillashaw a title shot right off rip, we've clearly gone off the rails of sporting integrity, far beyond what we've already gone down. Like that'd just be absolutely nuts. So
who gets a title shot first, Aljamain Sterling or Leon Edwards?
Oh jeez.
Aljo.
Or do they have to fight each other?
Neither.
Actually, we don't care about weight classes. You two have to fight each other. We're like,
I'm going to go out on a limb and say neither. That the UFC is going to unfavorably match both of them up, and they're both going to lose. Like the UFC is going to make Edwards fight Masvidal, and or something like that. And the
thing is, Aljo. they could do that to Aljo, because as great as Aljo is, he is capable of losing a fight at any time.
Yeah. Put him against
Edwards. Edwards is just going to keep wrecking shop until he gets his. Like, Edwards is airtight. Like, he just, you know what I mean? He doesn't really make mistakes.
Yeah, like how many people are you going to favor to beat Leon Edwards? And it's just such a slim list, and the top name on that list is the champion. So
yeah. It's either him and Covington or Usman and Covington, because Usman holds a win over Edwards. It was actually a pretty good fight in the scheme of things. It was actually Usman's one of his toughest tests. But at the same time, Edwards has been out for he's coming out. I think by January it'll be a year and a half. So that's a long absence for a guy.
Yeah. So I mean, there's just a lot of potential to screw over Aljamain Sterling, and there's so many different ways that it can be done that I just.
And it's so sad.
Yeah.
So much screw job energy in this room.
It doesn't, but it doesn't make you talk about one of the more charismatic fighters on the roster. Yep. Someone who has absolutely no problem engaging with the media. He's someone who will be out front and center promoting. It's someone who, as far as we know, in his personal life and his conduct, he's not a problematic guy to get in bar fights or jump on Twitter and say just horribly racist and sexist things. So there's so many reasons why Aljamain Sterling should be getting this, besides the fact that he's earned it in the cage.
Yep.
And I think that's the craziest part about it. It'd be one thing if it was like Mike Perry or something. Was a top title contender. Like, I can see why you want to keep a belt away from this guy, because he's a fucking idiot. You don't want to see that. But I mean, Aljo's like seriously one of the nicest and seemingly most genuine people that I've come across in the sport. So I just find it fascinating that he has to consistently campaign for what should be sitting on his lap right now. I think it's absolutely nuts. And
only fake thing about that man is that rope chain he got around his neck.
Yeah, and
even that he admits it.
Yeah, that's definitely not real. So he washes the green stains off his chest. But it looks good though. It looks good. All right, so let's move along here, because we keep talking about it. But it's time to really talk about it. And I know I'm skipping around here a little bit, but I just want to get to it. Joaquin Buckley's knockout over Impa Kasanganay. What he said. Is that the greatest knockout you've ever seen in your life?
Well, here's the thing, and this is something that I feel like I'm going to be curbing and kind of cribbing from our friend of the show, Dave Doyle, who wrote an excellent op-ed about what this knockout was, in terms of style, in terms of significance, everything like that. And this touches on what I feel the same, is that this was, to me, top 2 most spectacular knockouts I've ever seen in mixed martial arts. It's this and Edson Barboza's wheel kick of Terry Edom. I actually referenced that when I was writing the play-by-play on Shirt Hog, the way that Kasanganay went down, where he was frozen and just collapsed down to the ground, was reminiscent of how Terry Edom went down, except for a little less, almost iconic looking, the face and everything. But in terms of the greatest, it doesn't have the significance of several knockouts in title fights, in major contender fights, in historical significance. And to me, and this is where I agree wholeheartedly with Dave Doyle, is that Holly Holm's knockout of Ronda Rousey was not only spectacular, but it was also so incredibly significant and noteworthy because it was the passing of the torch. It was the beating of an undefeated powerhouse. It was one of the biggest upsets in UFC history. It was all of these things that were put together. Now, Buckley had lost his last fight. He got knocked out by Holland, right? Kevin Holland. And he got knocked out pretty almost, not embarrassingly, but he got dropped frequently and he got put down and put away. So this isn't an undefeated hype train. This isn't whatever. This is a very exciting, pedal to the metal fighter who did an incredible thing, a thing that we've never seen before. We've never seen a knockout like this out of a Van Damme movie or something along those lines. This was a truly cinematic knockout, which is why it is sensational. It is spectacular. It is absolutely incredible to watch, and is the most retweeted highlight on you by leaps and bounds on the UFC. It's not even close. Like, the next biggest one isn't even in the ballpark. But the greatest knockout, it's not, because it wasn't. Because of who it was against. Impa Kasanganay was an undefeated fighter, impressive, had a good run in the Contender Series, had done well in the UFC to date, but he was still he's still a young up-and-coming fighter in the scheme of things of the division. And Joaquin Buckley isn't a world beater. He's a very exciting fighter, obviously. And what you said earlier, Ann, really stuck into my brain, in that we're probably going to see Joaquin Buckley fight some guy off the Contender Series next. This isn't a title shot winning knockout. This isn't a rankings worthy. This isn't going to pit him against Edmund Shabazian or just a name in the division that could also produce fireworks. This is a guy who might win, and he might fight like Deron Winn next, or Gerald Mearshart next, or if we're lucky, Khamzat Chimaev next, because that'd be kind of fun, and also at the same time low stakes. But this is the greatest knockout, and it's not the greatest knockout. And that's where I stand.
Yeah, the distinction between greatest and most spectacular, fantastic. And that's exactly how I look at this. Ben, before I jump on the soapbox, please, the floor is yours. What's your take on this? Where do you rank this knockout?
I think it should be in anybody's top 5 probably. But once you start to break it down at that level, it really comes down to what you value. We're talking about something that's completely a subjective judgment, even if there's a general consensus that these are the 5 or 10 best. There's a reason that they're in the highlight reels. It's certainly one of the most shocking ones I've ever seen. I mean, if I were to lay out, my greatest knockouts in UFC history, you're going to have Barboza versus Edom. You're going to have Yair Rodriguez versus Korean Zombie. You're going to have Masvidal versus Askren. And this one is in there. And some of them were in higher stakes fights than others. Some of them were just more beautiful from a technique and physics standpoint. I mean, there have been spinning wheel kick knockouts. Like, Barboza over Edom was not the first in UFC history, but it's the one that will never be off the highlight reels, because you could do that kick 10,000 times in the gym and you would never get it that perfect. And Barboza did it on a moving target. Like, it's just, it is the perfect, spinning wheel kick. But it wasn't as high stakes as, say, Holm versus Rousey. Yeah, so I'm not even going to bother to break it down from, the top 5. Once you get there, it's really just up to what you look for, what you consider great is going to determine, which you pick.
And that's an interesting thing you bring up, is that there's my top 5 and your top 5 are going to be not completely different. They're going to be fairly different. Like I'm going to picture like Fedor Andreylovsky. That kind of knockout will stick in my brain forever, because I remember watching the Affliction card and absolutely losing my mind. And it's one of those. That's one of those knockouts that you see, like Ant. When you were cage side and saw a certain knockout that may make your head explode, that also will stick for you forever too. And that's kind of fun. Like that our lists can be different, but we're all right, and that's what makes it fun.
Right, and it creates such an emotional reaction out of someone that emotion you can't detach from, like the memory, where you were, like who you were sitting next to, what you were drinking, like what was where in your life were you and stuff like. So as you said, like the times I've sat cage side for some spectacular knockouts, like to watch to witness Askren get decapitated by Jorge Masvidal, just feet in front of me, and watching all these media members that I'm friends and colleagues with, and people whose work I've admired and respected for years, and to have John Morgan turn around and look at you dead in the eye, like and then you're both like backstage. So I'm like, man, can you believe that? I can't believe I saw that. And this man has seen everything under the sun. That sticks out to you. To see my first experience being cage side as a credentialed member of the press, to see Daniel Cormier's eyes roll in the back of his head after a John Jones head kick, and some of the most vicious ground and pound I've ever witnessed in my life. And it's jarring. It sticks with you. So it's hard for me to detach that and then look at something that I've only seen on television and rank it anywhere near. It's difficult to do that. But that being said, I agree with Dave Doyle on a lot of this. You can't just say that the great knockouts are the most spectacular ones, because we can comb the regional scene and we can find some of the most ridiculous knockouts you've ever seen in your life, as far as technique is concerned, as far as just visceral, oh, this is amazing. I've been there many times, to be at a, I've coached, for my friend, who was an amateur champion, at a couple of his fights where there was one, he floored a guy in, I think it was 6 seconds with a switch kick. Like that's, but he didn't do it against, a UFC level competitor. And even if you did it against a UFC level competitor, did you do it against a top 15 guy? Did you do it against a top 10 guy? Did you do it against a top 5 guy? Did you do it to a champion? So when you factor all of these things in, like where that list just narrows and narrows and narrows and narrows. When you try to detach your personal experience and your emotion out of it. And I think too, it's important to remember all the three of us on this panel have all trained in martial arts, and and have kind of done our thing in that world. So you appreciate certain techniques that you witness someone accomplish. That, man, I was like, man, I'm on the heavy bag. I have a lot of trouble getting this particular kickoff. So to see Yair Rodriguez just land this crazy jumping switch kick to knock out Andre Fili, is like, oh man, God, that sticks with me more, because I've been trying to land that damn kick on the bag forever.
Oh, see, that's probably why I fade Masvidal versus Askren a little bit, because coming from a wrestling background, when I started working with MMA people, I found that of my 5 favorite takedown entries, like 3 of them got me guillotined and 2 got me kneed in the head. So like, I'm like, yeah, I don't like that.
and it's so funny to think that there are so many outstanding knockouts that are even notable. Like, I'll give you another example that isn't even on like in part of the discussion. That Davy Gallen, a guy in Britain, hit a rolling thunder kick on Ross Pearson at the end of a hard fight. Like, this wasn't a first round roll. This was a 4 and change minute, third round rolling thunder kick, and put Ross Pearson out in a way that we've not seen him other than maybe Dan Hooker. So, and that didn't even like hold a candle to any. It wasn't even mentioned. We've seen soccer kick knockouts. We've seen Rampage Jackson pretty much put Ricardo Arona through the floor, and everything has, you know, significance. And it's all amazing and it's incredible. But the significance factor and the context about the knockouts is where I think the dividing line is. And that is to say, people that disagree and think that more spectacular, flying, crazy Eve Edwards, Josh Thompson knockouts deserve recognition and merit, you're right. They do. That was incredible. I couldn't do that. They couldn't do that. They could try that 1,000 times. They wouldn't do that. So the smile that we're having, the joy we're feeling, remembering, you know, all of our craziest knockouts, that's the best part of the discussion, I think, because we all have our different lists. We're all correct. I mean, unless you disagree with Holly Holm, Ronda Rousey being a top tier knockout, then, you know, whatever. But otherwise, I don't know. I'm happy. I'm happy this weekend. And this is something that I'm going to touch on, and I want everybody to bring up later, is that the knockouts this weekend all felt crazier, wilder, when a spinning wheel kick knockout isn't the biggest thing, isn't the biggest story in a top fight. And it blows, and a jumping switch kick knockout that happened elsewhere, or a flying knee knockout that led to a break dance in the cage that lasted longer than the fight itself, just about. Absolutely so amazing. And it makes me happy. I think that's what I wanted to leave it as.
Well, I think that's an appropriate place to leave it, and we'll briefly touch on at least one of the gentlemen that was name checked several times throughout that little discussion we just had. Edson Barboza, who competed on this card, won a unanimous decision Saturday night against Makwan Amirkhani. Now, fellas, he is 2 fights into his stint at featherweight, 1-1 in the division after a pretty, you know, controversial decision against Dan Ige in a spectacular fight. But gentlemen, do we think his future lies at featherweight, or is it time for Edson to pack on that extra 10 pounds, eat a cheeseburger, and go back to 155?
Allow me to take a sip of my haterade here.
My favorite drink, by the way.
Yes. I still don't believe in Edson Barboza at 145. He won, and he won in dominant fashion. I mean, arguable 10-8 round in there, just completely dominant performance. Having said that, Makwan Amirkhani fought a terrible fight. I know he came up on relatively short notice, but the blueprint on how to beat Edson Barboza is there. It's a known thing now, and I'm not saying it's easy to do, but it is easier to do than it was 5 years ago. But Amirkhani just hung out in kicking range for 15 minutes. That is the one way to guarantee that Edson Barboza is going to heavy bag you, which is exactly what he did. The only problem with that, as far as evaluating Barboza as a featherweight, is Amirkhani didn't test his chin or his gas tank. And those are the two things that are going to be a question mark when a man over the age of 33 or so drops in weight. I still am of the opinion that I've never seen a top 15, top 20 fighter drop in weight after his 33rd birthday, and it was a good idea, except for Frankie Edgar. And no, Randy Couture doesn't count because small heavyweights dropping to light heavyweight is a different thing. But generally speaking, it's a bad move. They end up looking like Josh Berkman or BJ Penn much more often than they end up looking like Frankie Edgar, where he dropped from lightweight to featherweight and ended up getting multiple title shots. So I still don't believe in Barboza at 145. Having said that, I don't think Barboza is a future title contender in either weight class at this point. So I just want him in the weight division where he can have some entertaining fights, make some money for himself, maybe winnow out the wheat from the chaff in whichever division. So if he sees 145 as a better place for him to do that, great. My thought is, though, he probably thinks 145 is going to be his key to getting into the title picture, and it's going to be ugly if he gets there.
Yeah, I don't think I could have said that any better myself, Ben. It's one thing to, and also let's talk about the divisions that we're choosing between. 145 is obviously a division that has its fair share of talent, but your other alternative is the most talent-rich division in the entire sport, and you've already failed climbing up that ladder to the top. Like, we've seen what he looks like against Khabib Nurmagomedov. We've seen that already.
Yep.
Granted, there are exciting fights for him in both weight classes, but I think, like an aging athlete, cutting more weight should just be out of the question. I mean, Edson Barboza, I was amazed that he even made 145. I was just trying to figure out where was he losing this extra weight from, because he was already physique wise like one of the one of the more put together fighters on the roster. So like, you're going to go from an 8-pack to a 12-pack. I don't know where you're losing any of this weight from, but it just doesn't seem like a healthy thing to do at his age. Granted, he's made that trip twice now successfully, and if he's got some good fights on there, take him. But man, I just think it makes more sense for him to just have some exciting fights now. Sign me up for him versus Nate Diaz at 155. Sign me up for that.
And the fight that was supposed to happen on Saturday, him versus
Sadiq
thank
Yusuf?
you. I was gonna say Hakeem Dawodu, and I'm like, no, not him. Sadiq Yusuf. I still want that fight.
Yeah, that's still an excellent fight.
And Edson Barboza is in a very difficult predicament because he's a fringe top 15 featherweight. He was ranked actually off of a loss to top 10 Dan Ige. It's one of those drop to a division, get ranked with a loss, Jose Aldo, Frankie Edgar kind of things that happens surprisingly more often than it should. And Barboza, I say he's in a difficult predicament because his name has more value and legitimacy than his talents as of late. Because of the performances and because of the people he has fought, he is not up to that level. But then again, he's been losing to the best fighters in the world. Oh no, he lost to Khabib. He lost to Kevin Lee when Kevin Lee was doing a good thing. He lost to Justin Gaethje. He didn't lose to Paul Felder. He lost to Tony Ferguson. Every single top 5 name has just about gotten one by him. But because of that, he's in the position where he can't really take many of these Makwan Amirkhani fights. Respect to Makwan Amirkhani, but our pals at Fight Matrix, who do rankings all the way through the division, have Amirkhani as the number 45 featherweight. So this isn't a top name, top echelon guy. He's certainly not a top 15 guy in the UFC rankings. I actually picked on the Sherdog Pick'em that Amirkhani would be able to out-wrestle and out-grapple Edson Barboza because I didn't think he'd be able to have the strength to do it. Well, it turned out Edson Barboza didn't have to worry about getting taken down other than at the last 5 seconds of every round. So, game plan aside, would a better prepared Amirkhani have done better? We don't know. But the question marks and how easily he was able to get taken down towards the end of those rounds makes you wonder what happens if he fights a guy who's going to put him on his back. Now, the best thing about 145, and it's a reason why he probably dropped down, look at 145's top rankings. How many guys are going to try and out-wrestle you? Max, Brian Ortega, Zabit, Korean Zombie, Yair. Not many of them are takedown guys. Then you go to Calvin Kattar and Josh Emmett, Arnold Allen, Jeremy Stevens. You're not going to find many guys that are going to really try and out-wrestle you like a Kevin Lee, like another name at lightweight that's going to, put you on your back, like a Charles Oliveira who's going to try and grapple you. So in terms of like doing the rampage thing and saying, I don't want to fight wrestlers anymore, this is the path for Edson Barboza to be able to survive. But these fights that he has ahead of them, he's too big of a name to draw an easy fight. And I don't think that's going to work well for a guy that officially has one win in the past, 4 fights? And, before the Dan Hooker beating. And that's really too bad for Barboza, because it's kind of the Frankie Edgar effect. You're never going to see Frankie Edgar fight anybody outside of the top 15. You're never going to see it. And that's difficult because, that means you're never going to have a break. You're never going to have a way to develop your skills. You're constantly going to be pushed to the limit, which is good and bad for fighters. But who do they have him fight next? Barboza, either you put him against a top 5 guy, which doesn't make sense, getting past the number 45 featherweight and getting a top 5 opponent because of your name only, because, oh yeah, you lost a top 10 fight to Dan Ige, which, it was debatable. It was a coin flip fight. A lot of people had Barboza winning. I don't remember if I did. I was in the building at the time with Mr. Duffy, but I think that was the Ige Barboza. Anyway, but he's got a few fights that look good. Calvin Kattar could be a fun one, but I personally think Shane Burgos is the fight, because Shane Burgos had a very similar performance against Makwan Amirkhani, in that he got taken down the first. Well, I mean, there's some differences, but he was able to get through Amirkhani the way that Barboza almost, was able to do easier. Barboza's in a tough spot because his name's bigger than what he brings to the table right now at 145. So I don't know what's for him, but I just want to see crazy stuff.
Yep. You were down here for Ige versus Bektic.
Oh, Bektic. Thank you. That's the one.
Yeah.
You weren't even paying attention. Ridiculous.
I wasn't. I was chopping it up with boys in the ESPN in the back row.
Ridiculous. All right. It's time to move on from that dreadful bit from Mr. Petrie there. Facts and figures. Anyway, so we're gonna move on to the Eating Crow segment.
Getting treated like Jason Burgos up in here by our host.
So this is
Have
where
I been demoted.
Whew, you make one mistake.
Just unforgiving over here. This is only to cover over my mistakes, many of which I've made. And they've made it to air too. So let's go ahead and move on to the Eating Crow segment, where we briefly talk about one result over the weekend that shocked us, or it just kind of we didn't think was going to happen that way. So Ben, I'll start with you. What's your Eating Crow for this week?
Well, first I have to congratulate myself, because of the 16 people in the Sherdog Pick'em League, only 3 people chose Ilia Topuria to beat Youssef Zalal, and only 2 people chose Cory Sandhagen to beat Marlon Moraes, and I'm the only one who got them both right. So, however, I did get a couple of fights wrong. I picked Marcus Perez to beat Dricus du Plessis, even though I know that Marcus Perez is not a good fighter, and even though I know he's not a good fighter, and beyond that, he is a not good fighter who does not fight to his best advantage a lot of the time. So he's not even the kind of guy who's just going to like jump up and maybe thrash somebody he shouldn't, just by pitching a perfect game. But I just didn't have any faith in Dricus du Plessis. I thought at the time that he might be the first South African fighter ever to get a fight or to get a win in the UFC. I wasn't right about that. I think Gareth McClellan got a win in the UFC.
One.
Yeah. But within 90 seconds, I was like, oh man, why did I ever pick Perez to win a fight? And I just sat there for 3.5 minutes and took my medicine. I had the fast forward 30 seconds button, but I was like, no, this is my punishment. I have to watch this whole thing. That crow, it was hot and spicy.
All right, Jay. So let us know why you have the seasoning salt out to make that crow taste so delicious.
Got the Mrs. Dash.
I too took a big bite and needed to bust out the Molly McButter to put on that crow, because let me tell you, I didn't think that Dricus du Plessis was going to be able to translate well into the big stage, but I was wrong. But in addition to being wrong with that, because I was fairly inconsistent with my picks this week, because I saw things that weren't there, or that the fighters didn't display, or other things happened.
You saw things that weren't there, like Paulo Filho in the second Sonnen fight.
I was speaking off into my corner that wasn't there, but I had faith in Ben Rothwell, and that isn't an embarrassing thing, because Ben Rothwell has had some very spectacular and unorthodox performances over the years. Performances is the right word, but I never in a million years would have thought that Marcin Tybura would put up 300 strikes in a fight, in a heavyweight fight, obviously. Never would I have expected that the guy who has historically shown that he either gets hit in the face and taken out, or he grinds you into a fine paste against the canvas or against the fence, would decide, hey, let's stand and bang with Ben Rothwell, a guy who has a 90% finish rate, with most of them being knockouts, because he can just bludgeon you until you fall down. I would not have even remotely expected his sudden dramatic change in style and volume and pace and pressure and cardio at 34 years of age after a dozen fights in the UFC. No way. And I don't think that was a bad call, but at the same time, because of how spectacularly wrong it ended up being, it deserves mentioning. And then I thought that Ben Rothwell, now granted, Ben Rothwell is 39 years old next week. Now, actually, no, it's this week. So he'll be 39 very soon. So that's getting up there at the, he's still coming down off of that failed USADA test. And I don't believe that was his first failed drug test in his career. And he has definitely looked different. His only stoppage win was basically by groin strikes and Stefan Struve falling down because his cup broke. It was that kind of effect. So I still thought that he had enough to push away an advancing Tybura and box him up and do what he had to do and make it kind of weird, like the Andrei Arlovski fight where they're kind of slugging it out and getting kind of bloody, and then he would be able to put the pace and the pressure. And he did for a round. And he completely disintegrated. He folded like a flan in the cupboard. It was something to behold, to see Ben Rothwell, who has historically been known to push the pace on guys and finish them later in the fight and either grind them out or grab hold of them and Kimura them after 3 rounds, or just bust them up for volume, get out volume by a guy not known for volume. So that I ate a steaming bite of that crow right there in that fight.
Well, I'll have to say that fortunately, you guys have eaten at least some of the helping of crow that I was planning on partaking in this evening. I thought Ben Rothwell was going to beat Tybura as well for those exact same reasons. And then I did think that Du Plessis was going to win. After his post-fight interview, when he said about being a real African, I wish he did lose, but that's another story. So my Eden Crow will be courtesy of the main event. I picked Marlon Moraes to win this, but I thought the fight would last much, much longer. I thought it was going to be Sandhagen's one of the guys who's heavy volume and a lot of pressure. So I thought he wouldn't have much trouble making it into the championship rounds. But I thought the variety that Moraes has to offer and just being the overall better athlete was going to serve him well to win a decision. Obviously, I was wrong there. So, gentlemen, let's move on now to the greatest title segment in all of media history, as I'm not surprised, Mr. Falcon. So what from the news coverage over the past week, whether it be UFC Fight Night 179, Bellator's event in Paris, KSW, BKFC, a lot of things happen combat wise. What surprised you or unironically didn't?
I'll go. As I alluded to earlier, I watched KSW 55 live kind of in the early afternoon on Saturday, and it was topped by the 2 winningest fighters in KSW history, in Michal Materla and, of course, Mamed Khalidov, who is certainly the greatest fighter KSW has produced, and probably the biggest star it's produced, unless you want Mariusz Pudzianowski. He's 40 years old. He had lost his last 3 fights. He had announced his retirement twice, and he was coming back to fight in Scott Askham, a guy who had thoroughly dominated them in their previous fight, which was the last fight for both guys. It was just last December. Askham had blanked him for 3 rounds. It won't make the leaderboard for the knockout of the year by the time it's all said and done, or the leaderboard doesn't matter anymore, is really what I'm saying. But he flattened Askham in 32 seconds with a Machida style jumping switch kick, but where Machida kind of did it in phone booth distance while Randy Couture was just standing there. Mamed Khalidov was going forward. He like just ninja'd halfway across the cage and just tagged Askam right in the face. He landed a couple shots of ground and pound, but the replay showed that Askam was looking in two different directions as soon as it hit. Like he just went down like this. It was shocking. I did not expect Khalidov to win that fight. I expected him to spend, 5 rounds fighting off his back, throwing up low percentage submissions and just kind of getting worked over by Askam, who is a much, much better fighter than he was during his UFC run. And he won, and he won in just the most shocking way possible, because that is not something that Mamed Khalidov has been known for, is acrobatic, kung fu movie knockouts. So yeah, I was stunned, and Mamed Khalidov is the KSW middleweight champion again. So he is a former light heavyweight champion, now a 2-time middleweight champion. I've, thrown out kind of my cliched line before, is that I was going to die without ever knowing whether Mamed Khalidov was the second best middleweight of his generation or the 15th. I still don't know, but his generation or his era is now still going, because he said he felt rejuvenated, no talk of retirement. And I don't think Mamed Khalidov is back in the sense of being the prime fighter that he was 6 or 7 years ago, but he's back in terms of being the middleweight champion of continental Europe's best fight promotion. So I am surprised, Mr. Falcons.
All right, Jay, what is your I'm not surprised, Mr. Falcons moment?
I was also quite surprised to see Mamed Khalidov in a full sprint boot Scott Askam in the face and take him out in 30 seconds. I never would have seen that coming. However, so I don't double dip that, I have I guess it's more news than it was not actually a live event. And it's not actually a live event because the Professional Fighters League, the PFL, doesn't have any events this year. And the reason why that is significant is because, how do I say it? Other events, other promotions do. Bellator's got them, UFC's got them, Ryzen, name. You can go down the list. Basically, all the major organizations are back in some fashion now. And the PFL is not, and it will not be, according to our latest information, is that 2021 is what we're looking at for a potential PFL reunion. And this is a problem to several noteworthy PFL fighters, one of which being champion Lance Palmer, who is suing the PFL for breach of contract and other things because the PFL has canceled events while, and understandably so, canceled these events because of COVID. But when PFL has found and discovered that there's a way to actually run events safely and do anything, has refused to do anything. And fighters galore are asking to get out of the contracts and saying, okay, this is crazy. You're paying me $1,000 a month. It's $1,000 stipend, I believe, starting in July. So they're making $1,000 a month from July to December. That's it. Besides sponsorships, they're not fighting. They're not able to fight elsewhere. They have exclusive contracts. So they're not getting out and going to Russia or going to Japan or something. They're locked in. And in the meantime,
I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
In the meantime, PFL just announced a whole bunch of signings that are this past week. New signings that are going to be on the roster, including Cesar Ferreira, former UFC middleweight, a whole bunch of other noteworthy fighters. Shaman Moraes, who was a UFC and World Series of Fighting fighter. Let me see, Renan Ferreira, who was also, I believe he was in the LFA for a while. There's a whole bunch of names. Is the point is that PFL is signing people for its 2021 season. Despite the fact that things are disintegrating around this company, they are adding fighters to a roster that doesn't have anything to do. Now, PFL announced that they're going to start in April. So, yeah, that's still a long way from now. That's a couple months away. And I don't know how this is going to work. And I'm surprised that the PFL is able to lure fighters to join their ranks whilst the champions are suing for not being able to fight. So I don't get it. I don't know what's going on. And that's right. PFL has also recently relatively recently signed, Muhammad Usman, Johnny Case is over there, Olivier Mercier, Bubba Jenkins, I think, was recently picked up by PFL. So PFL is signing people while knowing that they're not going to have events for another 6 months. And that's if we're lucky. That's if PFL is able to figure out how to run its own events, because apparently they can't figure it out right now. Because even though there could be non-tournament events going on, PFL has actually held those events in the past. They did Daytona, Everett and Seattle, Washington. They're not. And so it's a very weird time for the PFL, an organization who I'm not going to apologize by saying I didn't think would be around next year, still thinks it's going to be around next year.
Yeah, pretty strange developments there. I'm very curious as to how this is going to play out in several different aspects. Why they're acquiring talent still? I mean, maybe they're just trying to replace the people that are walking out the door right now. How the lawsuit's going to play out. It's so many different angles to examine, and I'm sure we'll get some more answers over the next coming months.
I've got to throw in here. I mean, Jay, you're the attorney, not me, but I think if you're Lance Palmer, you can say, hey, my PFL contract is basically a guaranteed $1 million.
Well, not only that, but
just be like, look at these fools, and I know how to wrestle.
Well, I mean, it's funny you say it because it's partially unjust, but at the same time, it's called frustration of purpose, is that you have signed to be able to do these things under the expectation that you'll be able to win this contract and win these fights and get up there. So there is, long story short, Lance Palmer and company have an actual case here. And that's not what the PFL wants. They have more of a case than Mark Hunt does right now after the class was certified. So that's saying something.
All right. Well, I'm not surprised, Mr. Falcon's moment. It harkens back to a lot of the urban legends that we have in the sport. So there's Tito Ortiz getting knocked out outside of a bar in London. There's Frank Trigg and Bruce Buffer beating each other up in an elevator. And we finally have clarity to at least one of these fantastic stories. And we've all heard the rumors of Wanderlei Silva getting knocked out by one Krazy Horse, Charles Bennett, backstage at a Pride event. Well, it turns out that's true. In a book published in the past week, Wanderlei Silva admitted to this being a real thing. Like, so after Krazy Horse beat one of his shooter box teammates, came backstage, they get into a verbal altercation, Wanderlei and the jiu-jitsu coach for the team, and Krazy Horse knocked out Wanderlei. Krazy Horse is about my size. He might even be a little bit smaller than me.
He's like 5'6", and he's a featherweight. Yeah, I mean,
see, if I was in good shape, I'd be a featherweight.
he's like Prime Ant Walker then.
Oh, okay, yeah, he's Prime Ant Walker. I can't imagine myself knocking out axe murderer Wanderlei Silva. Not Wanderlei Silva. Granted, I'm no version of Wanderlei Silva could I knock out, but we're not talking about Wanderlei Silva in that cringy, like, black and white promo video with the rock and roll guitars where he's like saying a bunch of nonsense, or the Wanderlei Silva that was going to fight Victor Belfort. Nope. We're talking about axe murderer, Pride champion Wanderlei Silva. I'm surprised that was actually possible, that Krazy Horse was able to knock him out. And I'm not surprised that it happened as well, because Pride was a circus, and circus things happen backstage at a circus. So there we go. Now let's move things along here to the speed bag. And this is where I get to flex my authority on you mofos. You're going to have 10 seconds to answer some questions here. Allow my phone to stop being stupid and let me pull these up here. So I'm going to start with you on this one first. Ben, you'll have 10 seconds to answer the following question for me, sir. That question being, who would you make MVP, Michael Venom Page, fight next in Bellator? And where it go?
Someone terrible. I just want to see the guy style on terrible fighters. I would watch it every week if they want to do that. I don't care about contention. Just roll them out and let them fight terrible fighters.
Jay.
You know that they're probably going to make him fight a newcomer. That's the crazy thing. But in actuality, he should fight Paul Daly for Paul Daly's retirement fight.
Yeah, I don't ever want to see those two in the same room together. So this next question, I'm going to start with you, Jay. Have you already forgotten about the UFC Fight Night card from last week?
You know, it's a funny question. I don't think I could tell you 6 results from that card. And I wrote the play-by-play.
Ben.
Yeah, it was one of the most forgettable Fight Night cards of this year or any year. Half those fighters didn't belong in the UFC.
All right. Okay, last question, and this one goes to you first, Ben. Do you believe GSP would actually come back to fight Khabib?
I think he would. I think if the money's right, he would. He misses competing. He's a risk-averse guy, but if he thinks he can win, he'll come back and do it.
Hey.
You know what the crazy thing is? I actually would put GSP to win that fight. This may be really early, but I would favor GSP. But would he fight? Only at 170.
All right. So it's time for me to switch the clock over to 30 seconds, in which I will answer all 3 questions back to back. And of course, the clock will start after reading the first question. So first question, who would I make Michael Venom Page fight next in Bellator? The only answer for me is Raymond Daniels. Like, just give me pure kung fu action. I want to see Enter the Dragon play out in real life. So have we already forgotten about the UFC Fight Night card from last week? What Fight Night card? And do I believe GSP would actually come back to fight Khabib? Of course he would do it, but it's a matter of whether the UFC will allow it. And the UFC doesn't like fun, so probably not gonna happen. So I think we should give it up and let GSP retire in peace. All right. So now we're going to conclude things by just briefly discussing some action that we are looking forward to over the next week. So Bellator's got a Thursday card, and that is headlined by Cris Cyborg versus Arlene Blencowe. What chance do you gentlemen give Blencowe for an upset? And which other fight on this card stands out to you?
Man, I really, really feel for Arlene Blencowe because she's a really likable lady. She spoke to one of our guys recently. She's, I think she's talking to Jason Burgos, or has already spoken to Jason Burgos today. But man, if she is not able to get by Julia Budd, and this is MMA math, I know, but if she can't get past Julia, if Julia Budd's going to outmuscle her, and Cyborg easily outmuscle Julia Budd, I don't see it, and that really is too bad because she's the Joe Benavidez of Bellator's women featherweight. So no, but in terms of fights that are noteworthy, it breaks my heart today to see that the Curtis Millender Joe Schilling fight was canceled because of course that's the nonsense fight. You know Joe Schilling is going to do great, have a fantastic first round, and get knocked out in the second in spectacular fashion. I was so all for it. But that's off the table because we can't have nice things. In terms of a backup plan, I'm going to go with Aviv Ghazali because I believe this kid, while he's still a long way away from any sort of contender or any sort of we really know where he is in the world, he is a crazy submission attacking guy. He is if there's such a thing as a glass cannon submission specialist, that's your guy. He's going to dive on a heel hook. He's going to put himself in a stupid position because he knows he can scramble. And I say that knowing that his longest fight is a 4-minute fight. So this guy has not taken long to do what he does. I mean, he jumped down last year and hit 11-second heel hook. And the kid he's fighting, I don't know much about him actually, basically at all. And I think that might be the point. He's a 1-0 guy from Georgia or Louisiana or some Southeast region. And it's that kind of fight that they're going to make Aviv Ghazali style on him. And that means we're probably going to have a 5-0, 5 submission guy at the end of the night. So I think that's going to be fun, at least while it lasts.
All right, Ben, what fight do you want to highlight on this card?
You're not even going to ask me if I think Blencowe can beat.
all right. I'll tee up the chance for a sarcastic joke.
I don't even have jokes. This is going to be sad. I think Cyborg is going to knock her out in the first round, and it's going to be brutal. Cyborg does not play with her food. Like, say what you want, like, you know, but her worst loss was due to overaggression. You know, I like Bandejas versus Leandro Higo. There are two guys who've probably shown us their ceiling at 135 at this point. I don't think either of them is really a future or current top 10 guy, but that division being what it is, one or both of them is probably going to get a title shot at some time in the next couple of years. It should be a lot of fun. Just, you know, tons of action. I don't know if we'll get a finish just because it's bantamweight and they're both pretty tough guys, but it should be rock and roll.
But there's the potential, just the potential, for sweet chin music by Bandejas, and I am in for that.
Oh, wouldn't that
would be lovely. That definitely will be lovely. So the fight that, you know, I'll say as far as the title fight is concerned, I mean, this is probably going to feel like Cyborg Strikeforce days. You know, the idea of Cyborg annihilating somebody and then Scott Coker coming in the cage handing her a belt. This is Strikeforce reimagined. But as far as fights that I'm looking forward to on this card, I see a lot of potential in Saad Awad versus Mandel Nalo. I mean, that could be either the most boring, 15-minute lay-in pray fest, or it could be just some ridiculously weird mix-up of styles and seeing Nalo just doing some wild stuff while trying to shuck off takedown attempts. That sounds like something that could go either way. Either way, I'll be tuned in to catch a glimpse of what it could be like. But also the UFC is in action. The main event in Abu Dhabi is going to be Brian Ortega versus Korean Zombie. These two are finally going to be fighting each other. And for Brian Ortega, I mean, he's been off for quite some time. We haven't seen him since losing the title fight against Max Holloway. God knows how many events ago that was. It feels like 3 lifetimes ago. Now, do you think Brian Ortega is going to get affected by that ring rush, gentlemen?
No,
I think, you don't think so?
I don't think so. He's a guy that's always fought, like twice a year at best anyway. And just, he is Brian Ortega no matter what. I mean, we're talking about a guy that won like his first 7 fights in the UFC without ever winning a round. Like, he literally did not win a round. He lost every round until he finished the other guy. I don't know if he wins. I don't have a pick for that one yet, but whatever version of Brian Ortega goes into the cage against Korean Zombie, I don't think the time off matters. He's one of the few guys that I don't think it matters that much.
I disagree, and that's exciting for me. I like that we can have a little dissension on the panel, and I do because Brian Ortega, as you mentioned pretty accurately, other than his positive steroid test, pretty much lost every fight along the way until he got the finish, and that I don't think he'll be able to do that against what Korean Zombie has become of late. Korean Zombie is like the pinnacle of fast starters in the division right now. And I think that's a really bad thing for a guy who's been out since December 2018. I think that Ortega, this is a guy who relies on his durability, and he'll take some shots and he'll put himself in bad positions and he'll try and work himself around to get it. And he always has, except for when Max Holloway taught him how to box in that fight. Other than that, he's that guy who can rely on that. And if he comes out slow, trying to get his sea legs about him, I think that's when Korean Zombie can do something. So I'm concerned about that for Ortega if he has like a slow minute or two, because Korean Zombie don't play.
Yeah, Korean Zombie is not the guy you want to warm up against. He is, and warm up I think is going to be a very essential thing. Like, Ortega's corner is probably going to try their best to kind of exhaust him before he gets out there, because he's got to be dialed in like it's the 3rd round already. Korean Zombie is just always on. That off switch doesn't exist with that man. So you gotta have to. And then also I think from a technical standpoint, I don't see Ortega with a lot of advantages here. Low key, I mean, we know him for his brawls, for his durability and just the wild situations that he finds himself in when he steps in the octagon. But Korean Zombie is one of the most improved technical fighters in the organization. This is a guy who makes leaps and bounds between fights and does some pretty amazing things. You're talking about a guy who was just 1 second away from firmly outstriking Yair Rodriguez to win a 5-round decision before the elbow from hell landed. We're talking about the guy who was able to knock out Mark Hominick in just a few seconds.
Bang.
You know, and someone who's consistently shown this improved striking, and then on top of that, the first twister submission in the Octagon, was able to Darce choke Dustin Poirier when that was like his signature thing to do. So, I see in Brian Ortega's risk aversion and the layoff, it just sounds like a bad recipe to me. Like you said, he puts himself in bad positions. Do you want to put yourself in a bad position against KC? I don't think so. That doesn't seem like a good idea to me. So I'm going to go on a limb here and say that I think Korean Zombie should get it finished by the second round. I think it's going to happen. The fast start and the improved technical abilities and the ring rust on Ortega's part, it's going to be a rough night for him.
Now, let me ask you, fellas. Do you think this fight will play out on the feet mostly or on the ground?
I think it plays out on the feet mostly. Ortega, as great as he is on the ground, he's not exactly the best takedown artist. I think the fight goes to the ground if Zombie wants it there, and if he allows himself to get taken down or he gets sloppy with striking and Ortega changes levels on him fast. I think that's the only way that happens. I don't see a world where Zombie would choose to fight on the ground by initiating a takedown, and I don't see Ortega completing some solid wrestling that's going to stifle what Chan Jung is going.
No, I mean, Ortega's submissions in the UFC are, guillotines where he, initiated them from the feet, or, Diego Brandao went into his guard. That's it. He's not a traditional takedown guy. He's not going to have Rener Gracie in his corner.
That's a good point, man. He's going to have Jay Park in his corner, though. Jason Park. I'm no relation to Jay Park.
I think it's more of a possibility that we see Ortega lock in some like crazy standing submission, like they get into a clinch and then he pulls guard into a guillotine or something like that. That sounds more likely to happen than some sort of long ground battle or even a short ground battle, in my opinion there. But I would say the smart money is going to be on Zombie with winning this with his hands. I think he lands a couple good strikes and ends this night early. So fellas, I think that should do it for this edition of Unleashed. We will definitely discuss some more of the results of next week's event when it happens. Of course, we'll go ahead and talk about that, and hopefully we'll get to highlight some undercard fights and maybe some more people get their heads spin kicked into oblivion next week that we could talk about. But in the meantime, you've got to like, you've got to share, you've got to subscribe, tell a friend to tell a friend, tell that friend to tell 10 more friends. And he's been Duffy. He's Jay Petrie. I'm Ann Walker. You got to stay beautiful, stay positive, stay sexy. See you when I see you. Peace.